BBOR, Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia. Black Box Ned 88 on Instagram TV for the bonus podcast. Before we get started, just a couple quick announcements. The first thing to say is that we will be continuing with our series on the Golden State Killer later this week. Also, I found some things on Hulu about Earl Van Best. I had been meaning to get around to watching the documentary series that they had made about the book The Most Dangerous Animal of All, Gary Stewart, Michael Wachsel, and all of that. We've done a book discussion on that one in the past, as well as an upload on the Michael Wachsel theory, talking about his book, The End of the Zodiac Killer Mystery. And I started watching the documentary, but it's in several parts, so there are several episodes, so it'll take some time to go through that. Once that's done, then we will have a discussion on that one. And the final thing is to say we have another big thing to talk about regarding serial killers tomorrow on the channel to anybody who's listening live. And in the future, please feel free to visit some of our uploads on serial killers. We have a serial killer playlist, as well as some things on the psychology of serial killers, and we'll be continuing with that tomorrow. Today we're going to be talking about the Zodiac Killer and the Exorcist Letter. And we're going to be doing things a little bit differently in this one. The first half of this upload is going to mention a few things in regards to the Exorcist Letter, and then I'm going to go straight to some of the questions and comments that you guys have left about the Zodiac Killer, and we can tackle that subject. So we're going to be doing a couple things in one. First, I thought it would be great if we just read off the Exorcist Letter. This is coming to us from 1974, and then we can have a discussion about it. Okay, here it goes. I saw and think The Exorcist was the best satirical comedy that I have ever seen. Signed, yours truly. He plunged himself into the billowy weave, and an echo arose from the suicide's grove. Titwillow, titwillow, titwillow. P.S. If I do not see this note in your paper, I will do something nasty, which you know I'm capable of doing. And there's some symbols, and it says me, -37, SFPD, -0. What do we make of this? I mean, I would say that anyone who's looked into the Zodiac Killer mystery from time to time has probably encountered the Exorcist Letter at some point. You've probably heard the line, I saw and think that The Exorcist was the best satirical comedy that I've ever seen. Now, when I first heard this, I was thinking that, okay, this is just some guy doing twisted sociopathic morbid humor, or just saying things that are intentionally going to be making other people feel bad, and he knows that it's going to get other people's morbidity in full swing, for lack of a better term. I never really thought that there was too much depth into that. But I said that we're also going to be talking about some questions today. And the first one comes to us from an individual named Mark Brody, and he asked something about this, which prompted the upload, so thank you, Mark. Hello. The last confirmed letter from the Zodiac Killer was the Exorcist Letter in 1974, and it seems to suggest that perhaps he was planning to commit suicide. What do you think about this idea, considering that there are no confirmed letters from him after this date? Also, what's your opinion regarding the authenticity of the Snowman Christmas card that was discovered in the San Francisco Chronicle archives in the 1990s? As for the Snowman Christmas card, I'm really going to have to read up more on that before I can give an appropriate response. But what we can talk about is the Exorcist Letter. Is this a suicide note? Once again, big thank you to Mark. Excellent comment and excellent question. Is this a suicide note? He plunged himself into the billowy wave. Oh, at first I thought that was actually spelled incorrectly. That could be an A or an E. I thought that was an incorrect one of the Zodiac's misspellings. No, it does say billowy wave. It's, sloppy handwriting, as we said. And an echo arose from the suicide's grove. Titwillow, titwillow, titwillow. Now, the first thing to say is, if you had asked me this 3 years ago, I would have said, no, absolutely not. I don't think that's a suicide note. I think that that's just somebody playing mind games. However, what we can say is, it would be inappropriate to completely dismiss the possibility that the 1974 Exorcist Letter is a suicide note. There was a Zodiac Letter in 1978, however, that one is unconfirmed. I think most people seem to accept that the Zodiac Killer letter from 1974, the Exorcist Letter, was authentic. Although we always have to bear in mind that people would have seen publications of the Zodiac Killer's handwriting. Somebody could have practiced. That's not that complicated of an idea. Somebody could have practiced the handwriting to make it look like the Zodiac's and continued on forging the letters. And someone asked that question one time, do I believe that there were multiple letter writers at some point throughout the Zodiac mystery? Yes, I don't believe that all the letters and all the ciphers were written by one person. No. But in regards to this letter here, do I think that this was a suicide note? It would be inappropriate to dismiss that 100%. I think that would be way too dismissive. What I can tell you is, Titwillow, 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 that is something that is in reference to the Mikado. And what I said in terms of what do the symbols mean? What do the things, the hidden words in the Zodiac mean? If I can say anything, I think that even if you're going to go down the pathway that, they're significant of cult-like activities, is there this shadow network of cult behavior going on? What I can say is perhaps an alternative and a simpler one. The Zodiac simply pulled lots of references from many different things, and he was heavily inspired by literature rather than cult-like behavior. Once again, can't dismiss it 100% because I don't know everything, but I think that, that is definitely a reference to the Mikado here. I saw and think The Exorcist was the best satirical comedy that I have ever seen. Satirical is misspelled, Saterical. Comedy is misspelled, Comedy, and comedy is also separated with a hyphen, and then says sign yours truly. Truly is misspelled Truley, and lots of misspellings. And once again, we always should remember one other thing about the question, was this a suicide? What I can say is, Dr. Todd Grande brought up an interesting question, or a point rather than a question, in his psychological profile of the Zodiac Killer, when he said the Zodiac was either delusional or he was trying to make people think that he was delusional. I told you my first instinct when I read this stuff years ago, when I was just like, okay, this guy is just trying to be weird and play mind games. And that's what an answer to the misspellings could be. There are many theories about what people have to say about misspellings. But here's something else that I think is very interesting. If I do not see this note in your paper, I will do something nasty, which you know I'm capable of. The Zodiac really did try to get a lot of pieces of his writing into the newspapers. And it's really not only the ciphers. You might hear some people say things like this. The Zodiac also requested that everybody wear Zodiac buttons. And, there's one other letter that he requested to be put in print. The Exorcist Letter, definitely. He says that if I do not see this note in your paper, I will do something nasty. He requested this letter to be put in print. At the end, it says me-37 SFPD-0. One thing, though, we should talk about that and say that the Zodiac sometimes used like +11, +12. Sometimes he used the equal sign. Sometimes he used the dash, it could be like a subtraction sign, or like a negative rather than a subtraction, like -37. It could have its own meaning that way. Those could relate to angles of a particular feature, perhaps putting the Zodiac symbol on top of Mount Diablo, and you could go to 37 degrees, or perhaps you could also go to +10 degrees, 10 degrees north, well, actually, we shouldn't say 37 degrees south or anything like that. I take that back, but what I would say about that one is just that the Zodiac used the plus sign, the negative sign, and the equal sign when he's signing these things, like when he was writing these numbers out. SFPD-0. Okay, and I think that we will say one more thing about the Exorcist Letter and segue into the next question. In the Zodiac Killer hoax theory, and to give a little nutshell version of that these murders were committed by multiple people, and there's one person writing the first original Zodiac letters up until November 9th of 1969. His name was Hal Snook, and he's trying to take credit for murders that he did not commit. And there could be a variety of reasons for that. One of the things that Thomas Henry Horan, the leading proponent of the Zodiac hoax theory, says about this is that this was something that was significant of Hal Snook's behavior. We had a comment come in once when we did our book discussion on the Great Zodiac Killer hoax of 1986 that said, the hoax theory does not provide an explanation for the Halton Zodiac activity from 1971 to 1973. It's not until 1974 that we have the Exorcist Letter. Why so? Well, the explanation that is provided by Thomas Henry Horan is that after the Zodiac murders took place in 1968 and 1969, once again, this is his theory, mind you, he says that Hal Snook took up two sort of hobbies. One of them was collecting fossils and arranging them, and he actually became somewhat good at that, and in his retirement, him and his wife would sell these fossil displays to museums and such, so he was into collecting fossils. And the second thing was writing letters to the editor, which he did very frequently, and he would write letters to newspapers. And one of the possibilities, and I have this in the notes that Thomas Henry Horan wrote for some of our episodes, when he says that Hal Snook perhaps had the idea to write a letter to the editor or some sort of editorial about the film The Exorcist. And then he thought that this is also something that would fit with the theme of the Zodiac Killer that he had created. I just wanted to throw that out there. That is not my own original theory, but that is what Thomas Henry Horan has relayed to me, that he thinks that this is something that is reminiscent of Hal Snook's hobby to compose letters to the editor, or just being editorial, being a critic of sorts, and he thought that it fit in with the Zodiac persona. So I just wanted to throw that in. And in regards to the Zodiac Killer hoax theory, I mentioned that we were going to talk about the Exorcist Letter and then go into some of the comments. We've already mentioned two of them. And one of them is, our next comment is coming to us from Michael Vizard. Ned, please forgive me if I've already done this, but how persuasive do you think Thomas Henry Horan's Zodiac hoax theory is? I think he's fascinating, and I even listen to the Stones Unturned podcast now because of your vids. But how persuasive do you think his argument is? One reason it's hard for me to tell is Horan just has so much personal charisma and confidence in what he's saying. I have trouble separating the strength of his argument from the force of his personality. What do you think? Okay, and a big thank you to Michael Vizard for that comment there. Now, the first thing that I would say is that about the Zodiac Killer hoax theory and argument versus personality, we'll say one thing about personality in a second. I think that there's something impressive about someone who can get their suspects to the crime scenes and tell you how it happened, and this person was there on this date, and these are the explanations. I also asked Thomas Henry Horan when I interviewed him, what do you think is the biggest piece of evidence that you would give somebody who believes that the Zodiac Killer was one person versus a group of people? And his answer was, there's an FBI report about how different fingerprints were collected from every crime scene. The fingerprints, and there are prints that were left behind, are not consistent with a single person. Furthermore, all the information that the killer could have learned about came from the newspapers, the police reports, and the physical evidence doesn't seem to tie things together. Do I accept that? Well, no, absolutely not. I mean, if we only had 3 of the incidents, sure, like Lake Berryessa, the Zodiac wrote the symbol on the car door, Brian Hartnell witnessed the Zodiac sign on the killer's chest and the like on the costume that the Zodiac was wearing, as well as the phone calls. I mean, it's not only the letters, but that's one of the things that gets talked about a lot. How persuasive do I think it is? I would say that the biggest fault in the Zodiac Killer hoax theory is about how big it gets, and such as saying that maybe this guy, Hal Snook, wrote letters because it's the go signal and the stop signal for the Manson family, like the green light for Helter Skelter and then the red light to stop that off. But then Hal Snook could also be writing coded messages to an individual in Southeast Asia named Tony Poe to monitor the shipments of Cambodian heroin. And it's like, how many things are going on at once, all matching up with Hal Snook's military service? I think that it gets too big, and there are too many different what ifs and ifs, ands, and buts, and it gets a little bit too messy to support itself. As far as personality goes, I definitely do not think Thomas Henry Horan is a liar. I don't think the Zodiac Killer hoax theory is bunk. There are some people out there that are definitely peddling bunk, such as Gary Stewart, whom we're going to talk about later that week, Michael Wachtel and Susan Mustafa, who are all in on that ploy to just sell a bunch of nonsense regarding the Zodiac Killer. And we will talk about many specific reasons why they are genuine liars. Gary Stewart, Michael Wachtel, and Susan Mustafa. We also have some other people like Philip Powers, who was pushing his suspect, Kenneth Lester German. It's highly unlikely that he even thought there was any merit to that suspect. I mean, he got a couple articles in the newspaper. He got some people talking about him. He ran a Twitter page about it for 6 weeks, in other words. I mean, obviously, Thomas Horan has done many things other than that, and there are definitely people who are lying. There are people who are spreading disinfo about the Zodiac Killer case. But what is this answer here? Like, what do I think about Thomas Henry Horan's personality? I mean, what's the answer to that? Overall, I said that I think he is truthful, and he is putting stuff out that he believes. But I once saw a video from Jordan Peterson, who was critical of public intellectuals. And Thomas Horan is a professor, and he's like, a public intellectual is very likely to have one thing that they're going to hold on to, one solid idea that's going to become the consistent theme in all of their work. And he gives the example, Karl Marx was about economics, Sigmund Freud was about sexuality, and very specifically the coinciding nature of sexuality and aggression. And Jordan Peterson himself, he's all about hierarchies. What would Thomas Henry Horan be about? Informants, like police informants, CIA informants. And these are things that he learned about when he was investigating things as a fraud investigator. So it's a similar narrative. And you can find this with other people who are talking all about how the world works. Public intellectuals, the people who are selling their books, they're just like, they found something and they repeat the pattern. So I think that there's a little bit too much of that in the Zodiac Killer hoax theory. Somebody finds a narrative that they seem to like, so they repeat the pattern. And the first thing to say about that is that Jesse Walker wrote a book about this called The United States of Paranoia. And in that book, his central thesis is humans are pattern-seeking individuals, and we're going to put patterns in place. And then we're going to arrange our thought process based on these patterns. And there will often be an epicenter to that, but it has no relevance about intelligence, like IQ, or academic qualifications, education levels. Everybody is going to arrange the world into a set of patterns to expand upon their thought process and the foundations of their worldview. So the thing is, though, sometimes I believe these public intellectual types, I mean, I could definitely agree with Peterson when he says that they focus in on one thing. But what he didn't say was we could expand upon that. They focus in on one thing and then they repeat the pattern over and over again. And you can see this with people, investigators, conspiracy theorists, the people that go on the television and they talk about true crime and they talk about terrorism and they talk about conspiracy theories. They will often have found a pattern that at one point, maybe the first time they found this, it was completely true. They found it a second time. Oh, wow, this must be the answer to everything. And with Thomas Henry Horan, he likes to say that it's because the police cover up certain activities because they don't want to jeopardize their confidential informants. And the second thing is because the police are also doing things because they are just trying to save their own skin. They don't want to jeopardize the investigations. And it's like you have the informants in place, but then it's always about a sting operation, backfires on somebody, and then the police had to cover it up and they didn't want to jeopardize anything. That's what it really is, a sting operation backfire. Even the murder of Darlene Ferrin is said to have been a sting operation that backfired. So if I can just throw those two cents in right there. That would be my response that I would think that number one, the Zodiac Killer hoax theory, it gets a little bit too big and messy for its own good. And the second thing is it is a definite repetitive pattern in his work. So, but I think the charismatic thing, yes, he's a genuine believer in what he says. He's very persuasive, but there's a big problem, though, because this isn't just about someone's side of the story. This is not just like, what is your political opinion on something? It's trying to get very definitive answers. So I hope that answers the question there. And thank you to everyone who has listened to this one. If you like this upload, you can hit the like button. And if you haven't subscribed yet, you're welcome to do so. And what do you think about the Zodiac Killer, the Exorcist Letter, and any of the comments that we discussed here? That's all for me now. Until next time.